everyone. Good evening. Thank you for joining the Pamunkey Regional Library for yet another author chat episode. Today, I'm delighted to have Peng Shepherd here, who is the author of the recent book, The Cartographers. So there we are right there with its beautiful cover. It actually was released in March of this year. And this is her sophomore novel. Her first novel, The Book of M, came out a few years ago. And we're just delighted to have you. So thank you for being able to schedule with us. I hope that you'll get some new followers, after this chat. And again, my puppy is down here wanting to participate, but we're not going to let him be on show. So let's go ahead and I'm going to read your bio first. So, you were born and raised in Phoenix, Arizona, where you rode horses and trained in classical ballet. You've lived about half a dozen places, Kuala Lumpur, London, Los Angeles, DC, New York. The Book of M won the 2019 Newcom Institute for Literary Arts Award for Debut Speculative Fiction. It was chosen as the best book of the year by Amazon, Elle, Refinery 29, and The Verge, as well as was listed as a best book of the summer by The Today Show and NPR On Point. You're a graduate of New York University's MFA in Creative Writing program and the winner of the Elizabeth George Foundation Emerging Writers Grant. Okay, that's a lot, right? So let's start with that. How long have you been writing? And you can't say since childhood, because that's not true.
But it really, I have a funny story about that, because it actually is true. So I was one of those kids that, my favorite time of the day was bedtime, because I got a bedtime story and my mom would sit there and she'd, read me these stories. And I think when you're really, really little, you don't realize at first where these books are coming from. They're just stories. And then at some point you get old enough that you realize, like, wait a minute, somebody's writing these books that I'm reading, which means like I could be writing. And so I really did try to start writing as soon as I could spell. And so I would draw pictures with them and, make a little book, and I would give them to my mom and I'd say, let's read this for bedtime. Like, let's read my books. And there was one year where she thought, I was like maybe 6 or 7. And she thought it would be really fun to take one of the books that I had written and take it to her work and get it laminated and then put a little, like a spine on the side. Yeah. So she brought it home and she surprised me with it. And she said, here's your book. And I really thought I'd been published.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. So it really,
at that point, it's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. I was like, it's like official. Yeah. So it's really, it has been that long. Like I really have been writing ever since about the age of 5, and it's been my first love. And, along the way you get distracted with college majors and your first job and all, but it's always been the thing that I've loved and always the thing that I've come back to.
Now, you did not start writing for a career right away. So what did you do right out of college then?
So I got a bachelor's in Chinese language and literature, and then I got an MA in international studies and diplomacy. And so I went that route, and I was working a corporate job at a company for about 5 years, I think. And they provided they provided protective services to companies that needed to send people to work in hostile environments and war zones. So like very, very different from, what I do now. And it was, controversial and interesting. And it also just took, all of my time, because it was such a, it was such an intense job. And so I got to the point in my mid to late 20s where I thought, if I stick with this any longer and I get promoted one more time, I'm probably not going to leave, because it'll just be too big of a deal. And I knew that I was happy, but not in love with what I was doing, and I missed writing. And so that was the point at which I quit, and I applied for and got into the MFA in creative writing program at NYU. And then that's when it all, really got started.
So the first book baby was The Book of M.
Yes.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about that? And I don't have a copy here.
Oh yeah, I do. I have
your stuff is checked out right now. So
well, that's great. No, I love that. Well, I have a paperback here. That's my first baby. Yeah. It came out in 2018, I think. And so I call it a post-apocalyptic fantasy, I guess, because it is about an apocalypse, but it's got some magic in it. And it's about a mysterious phenomenon that causes people's shadows to disappear all over the world. And it follows a husband and a wife who have been hiding out from this plague for about 2 years, because if you lose your shadow, you also lose your memories. And so when that many people around the world lose their memories, society kind of collapses, things get really bad. So 2 years after this has started, we have the husband and wife, Ori and Max, and they've been hiding out and they're safe so far. But right at the beginning of the novel, the wife, Max, her shadow disappears. And so she runs away to protect her husband because she doesn't want to become dangerous when she starts to forget things and get her magical powers. But he, of course, loves her and feels like he can't lose the little bit of time they have left together. And so he follows. So it's about, her running and him following, and, will they meet up in the end? Will they find each other in time? Is there a cure? That kind of thing.
And while you state this might be like a post-apocalyptic, fantasy magical, there is some kernel of historical, cultural relevance to that story.
Yes, yeah. It was the way that I found my way into the story, because I had this really fantastical idea, like, oh, everyone's shadows are going to disappear all over the world, and like, what does that mean, and how would that even happen? I needed something to kick it off, and I wanted something that was as realistic as possible, because it is such a fantastical thing. And it actually turns out, I was researching shadows, and it turns out that for one day a year in certain countries around the world that are near the equator, everyone's shadow really does disappear for just one day. Not one day, it's like one hour. But if you go outside during that 1 hour once a year, all the shadows are gone. And I just thought, well, that sounds
pretty cool,
like magic, but it's totally real. Yeah. And so that was the hook, my way into the book, because it felt really neat that I could take, that I could take a magical thing and have it come from actually a totally scientific, totally real thing that actually happens in our own real world right now.
Now, I am, as many who have seen me do author chats and those who know me, I'm a historical fiction groupie. So when I come across books with fantasy, sci-fi, post, whatever you want to call it, they're like, why did you, like, what's going on? But I think it's so fascinating because even no matter what genre I think you write, there's always an element of truth, whether it's an event or whether it's just a culture or whether it's just people in general. There's always an element of truth. And I find that a lot with, reading up on Book of M, and then of course with the Cartographers, which we'll get into later. But so after the Book of M, how did you then move forward?
Oh, you mean with the second book? Like, were the
sales good enough, first off, for Book of M to prompt you to say, okay, yeah, I'll continue doing this? Because, first you have to write a book, and then you have to sell it, and then you have to say, oh my gosh, do I want to go through that all over again? And many authors have said that going on to book 2, 3, and 4, it's like almost like suicidal, because it's so hard to move on, like you have that first level of accomplishment, and it's like, can you repeat it and or excel further? So what was your boost to moving on to book 2? And what I'm referencing here is like the National Endowment for Arts and the fellowship.
Oh, okay. Like that. Yeah. So you never know how a book is going to do when it's getting ready to be published, because it really is just up to the readers. You can have all the publicity in the world and all of the marketing, and those things obviously help a lot because they get the book in front of readers, but it's really up to whether or not readers are connecting with the work and if they're enjoying it. And so I was really nervous because I thought that the Book of M, it's very special to me, of course, because I wrote it, but I knew that it was a very weird book. It's very weird. And I was just worried that it was going to be too weird for readers, especially as a first book, because nobody knew who I was. So I didn't have, a readership yet. And so I think that my editor and I were really optimistic, and we were hoping for the best, but it ended up doing so much better, I think, than anyone was expecting at the publishing house. And so that was very exciting. It was so exciting and wonderful. And it made me feel, confident about going forward. But it was such a different experience writing the first book versus the second book, because with your first book, you have to write the whole thing, and then you got to polish it, and then you find an agent, and then your agent helps you find this editor. And so you're essentially selling a finished thing. And with the Cartographers, we sold the book on essentially just a one-page proposal. It was basically just a page. And so it was a long road, and it was very different trying to write a book that I didn't really have yet. I had a premise, but I didn't have a story yet. And then there were a lot of things that happened, like the pandemic. That little thing happened in the middle. And then also that I ended up applying for a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. And it was supposed to be a travel grant that would let me go back to New York City and explore the area where the Cartographers takes place, and then, gain me access into a lot of these libraries and archives so I could go through their maps and go through their records. And then the pandemic hit and everything shut down, and it essentially became like a survival grant, which is so very different, but just as important in a different way. But it was, essentially the thing that kept me able to write the whole time while I was trying to finish the Cartographers.
And like I said, I don't know how I stumbled upon the Cartographers. It might have been book list. I mean, who knows? But the Cartographers, much like the Book of M, has a kernel of historical fiction in it.
Yes.
But it's not historical fiction. So go ahead and tell the story then about how this book baby came about.
Sure. So it started actually like probably 10 years before I actually started writing the books. So back when I was at NYU and I was in grad school, I had an instructor, and he would start every class by saying, "Has anyone heard anything interesting over the past week? Did you read anything interesting?" And this phenomenon came up. Somebody said that they had read about this longstanding secret practice among dictionary makers and cartographers, where they'll intentionally hide some kind of an error in either their dictionary or their map. And so in a dictionary's case, it's obviously a fake word and a fake definition. And in a map's case, it's called a phantom settlement. And it's, it can be like a mountain that's not really there, or a road that's a dead end that's not really a dead end, or in some cases, a whole town that you hope is far enough out of the way that no one's going to notice. And when I heard that, I just thought that just the most mysterious, interesting, like it made me want to go through every map that I'd ever seen and like look for these places. And that's what I started doing. I started going through maps and researching this phenomenon they're called phantom settlements. And I found out that there is a kind of famous one in upstate New York, because it essentially got put on a map as a secret copyright trap, because these cartographers were trying to protect their work. And by accident, it kind of became real because people discovered it and didn't realize that it wasn't a real place. And so they started building a real town where there wasn't supposed to be anything. And so they ended up making this, this phantom settlement into a real settlement just because of a map.
Now, the book has been, from the very beginning, it kicked off, and it's been, the New York Times described it as having layers upon layers of expertly told story. It was a USA Today bestseller, and it was selected by the Book of the Month Club. So, that's pretty darn impressive.
It was amazing. No, it was amazing. We have just been so grateful, Now,
you had a hardcover release, and that's that doesn't always happen. So was that in your contract? Was that just something they decided to do based on pre-sales? How did you manage to have a hardcover release for this book?
I think it's probably just been part of my contract. All of my books have had hardcover releases first. So I think, and it may also just be a function of the fact that William Morrow, which is the publisher where I'm at, it's an imprint of HarperCollins. I think that they tend to do hardcover releases for most of their books first, and then a year later you get the paperback.
I love it. Like I ran out and I was like, I need this because I needed the maps in it and I needed all of the things, right? So let's talk. I mean, I've of course mentioned the cover several times, and I just mentioned the fact that there are maps in it. The cover, this is not the original cover. There it is.
You mean the original cover for, are you talking about the UK cover?
As far as your first concept as to what the cover was going to be.
Yes. Yes, it was a long journey, and it was very interesting because we finished the book. It's getting ready to go to production, and my editor is saying to me, you know, do you have cover ideas? Let's talk about what you're envisioning. And we all thought it's a book about maps, so you know, no brainer, put a map on the cover. Yeah. And so we went through I don't know, at least 3 different map mock-ups, and it just never looked right at all. It either looked like a nonfiction textbook, which is, you know, that's fine, but if you're a nonfiction textbook, this is not, it's a novel. Or it would look like a YA novel, which is fine if you're a YA novel, but this is an adult novel, so you don't want to communicate like the wrong genre, you know? And so we went through, and it was months and months and months, and I remember we were so late that they were getting ready to send advanced reader copies out, and we still didn't have the art, and they were like, we have to get these copies out to reviewers, but we don't have a cover yet. And it wasn't until, I don't remember which one of us, my editor or me or my agent, somebody finally said, okay, what if there's just no maps? What if we just go for the library instead? Because the majority of the book is set in the New York Public Library. And then this was the first cover that came out of that idea. Everyone was like, it's perfect. This is it. This is what the book feels like.
It's like, great, we're done. Bye, run out. Quick before somebody changes their minds.
Yep.
Now this, and then of course the maps. I think the final count is what? Maybe 7 to 10, I think, is maybe the final count in here.
Listed.
If it even has that many.
It's got, I mean, I think I mentioned it like 100 maps.
You mentioned quite a few, but like in the book itself, it's got the images of several. How many were actually going to be in the book when it was 800 pages long?
Yeah, I had grandiose dreams. I think at one point I turned a draft in that had like 30 maps, and my editor was like, no. This is a permissions nightmare. We can't, you know, we cannot be going to 30 different museums trying to get legal rights to like 30 different historic maps that, you know, so, and she was right, of course. It would have been so fun to have 30 copies, 30 different pieces of a map. But I think there are 3 different maps in this, because sometimes you see a map twice because it's a mystery. And so each time you see the map, you get another clue because the main character Nell notices something on the map. And so I think it's 2 or 3 maps, but you see them multiple times.
And for those who don't know the premise of the story, basically Nell, the main character, finds a map in her deceased father's belongings. And they go on then like basically this wild goose chase to figure out why the map is in his possession. Why did he keep it? Why is everybody trying to find this copy of this map, et cetera, et cetera. The interesting thing that in my research about you is how you acquired a roadmap.
Yes. So the map that the book is based on is a very old copy. It's from like the 1920s, and it's one of those foldable gas station highway driving maps. And at the time that I heard that story that I referred to about 10 years ago about this old map from, you know, it's just a highway map, and it had that town on it that became real because people spotted the town and then they started building there. That's the map that this book is based on. And over the years, as I was just obsessively researching this place and this map, I thought, wouldn't it be neat if I could own a copy of this map? Because, you know, they're only, I went online and I looked, and they're like $5 because it's a highway gas station map from 80 years ago that nobody wants. Like, why would you need an out of date old map? And we all have GPS now. So I bought a copy, and then, you know, like a year later, I bought another copy because I thought, you know, why
not?
Yeah. And so I ended up with a few over the years, and then sometimes I've lost some, or they're too damaged, or it's the wrong edition and it doesn't have that town on it. But anyway, so fast forward 10 years, I finally finished this book, and my editor says at the end of production, she says, well, it's a book about maps and there's a mystery in this map. So obviously we need images of the map in the book. And she said, can you tell our art department, the information about this map so we can send somebody out to get a copy and then we'll scan it. And so I gave them the information. I didn't think anything more of it. And then, weeks later, it turned out that over the 10 years that I'd been writing this book, these maps had become rarer and rarer. So it was kind of mirroring what happens in the actual novel. Yeah. But it turned out that the publishing house could not find a copy to make the scans. And they were like, what are we going to do? Because it's all about this, it's a book about this map and we don't have the map.
Right?
Yeah. And so I said, well, I actually have a copy. So I think let me see. I think it's page 26 or 27. Yeah, I found it. So here on page 26 right here, where the map appears for the first time, and it's the full spread of the map that Nell ends up investigating. So that picture is actually a scan of my own map that I took it to a specialty print shop and we used my map and then put it in the book. So it was a really neat thing because I'd had this copy for like 10 years and I'd been obsessed with this town for about that long. And it was really nice to be able to like put my copy of that map into the book that I had written about it.
That's one of those serendipitous things.
It really was. Yeah, it was really neat.
Really one of those. And, I think it's really hilarious because as you've stated, you are not a plotter. So this was not something that you planned on doing ever. So it really reflects how you just write by the seat of your pants. Like, hey, I have this map. It fits the need. Perfect. Let's move on. So I really found that was hilarious. It's just, you can't make this stuff up sometimes.
No, not at all.
One of the things that you did with this book that I found very interesting is you use multiple points of view. Mm-hmm. And you have a lot of characters.
Yes.
So let's discuss, shall we? And at this point, people, if you haven't read the book, I don't think us naming the characters is really going to do any damage to your soul. So I think you're going to be okay. So we have Daniel, Tam, Nell, Felix, Francis, Eve, Wally, Ramona, Humphreys, and then Swan. Mm-hmm. And everyone has at least a chapter that's told in their point of view. Yep. But overall, you've got like a third person narrative type going on. So how did you find the mental space during COVID? Because you wrote this book largely during COVID.
Yes.
How'd you find the mental space to kind of grasp what you wanted them to say, how you wanted them to say it? All of that, because that's a lot to get. I mean, most stories you're going to find like 2, 3, 4 main characters tops, right? That are going to be like highlighted.
Yeah.
But this was huge. This was a
like
huge
8 or 9.
Yeah. It's like, oh my God, am I ever going to do this again? Like, oh. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So this will probably sound counterintuitive, but for some reason, I think it's easier for me as a writer to have more perspective than less. I think
there are many authors right now that are chucking books at the computer with hearing you say that. I just want to point that out, but go ahead.
It's really like, I think it is so hard, and I've tried to write a book from just one perspective and I get stuck. And I think it's because, to me, if there's another perspective coming in, it doesn't feel like a complication. It feels like kind of like an escape. Like I get to jump to the side and then see it from a different angle. And that's like easier for me than being stuck in the one head, because if you jump to another character's head, then you're seeing the whole thing from a new angle and you can get more information into the scene and into the reader. But if you stay in one person's head, the whole narrative, I just feel trapped. Like, I'm like, how am I going to tell the reader something else they need to know? Because this person doesn't know it. And like, I got to get out of this head, So to me, like, I think every time I got stuck, I just added a character.
How many did you know you were going to have from the beginning? Or did you just like randomly say, oh, I need another one? Like you just said, and just added. Yeah. Because honestly, I don't think anybody goes into a book knowing that they're going to have 8, 9, 10 main characters.
No, I didn't. Yeah. I didn't know I was going to have that many. I think so. When I started, there was just Nell and Felix, and actually Swan had a lot of point of view chapters, and it was the 3 of them. And then Swan got added because I got stuck. And then when I got to the end of that draft, I realized that Swan didn't actually need a point of view. He's a friend to Nell, and he's really important, but he didn't need his own point of view. So then I lost his point of view and added someone else, and then like lost their point of view. And then I realized that there was this group of 7 friends at the center of it, and it's this terrible thing that happens to them 30 years before the novel starts. And like, that's the heart of the mystery, is what happened 30 years ago to these 7 people, and how did it kind of destroy their really tight-knit friendship. And so then when I realized there were 7 of them, it ended up being Nell and Felix who had their points of view, and then I had 7 more people to write. And so that made it really fun and interesting, because I knew the central thing that had torn them apart. And so I got to just tell it from their 7 perspectives, like just going around the circle.
It's like Duck, Duck, Goose. Like, oh, you're it.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. It's like, whose turn is it to tell us the next terrible thing that happened? Yeah.
A lot of people will say that this book is about maps. And it is. Maps are certainly the catalyst. Yes. But I think it's more the relationship between those characters and that major event that happens.
Yes. Yeah. So I would say the same way that the Book of M is not, it's shadows are the catalyst, but it's really a book about like love. It's really about love and about marriage. And I would say that the Cartographers, maps are the catalyst, but it's really a book about obsession.
Yes, very much so. If it's not a person, it's a thing or a place, very much so. I mean, and then the plot twist at the end, of course, was just, I mean, it was coming, right? It was coming and coming and coming. And then it comes and you're like, oh. Was that your original ending?
It was. But it was rougher than with the Book of M. I got that ending really early, and it just stayed. I wrote it first, even before I wrote the full first chapter, and it never changed. And with the Cartographers, I knew that was the ending, but I didn't actually write the ending until I got there. I just had it in my head.
And then you had to figure out how to get from point A to point B without plotting, and without having a wall of Post-it notes for storyboards and things like that.
Yeah.
And to me, that's amazing. You've described how you just have stumbled upon ideas. I mean, basically that's what's happened. For Book of M, you're like, oh, shadows. Okay, cool. Let's find this thing, right? Yeah. And then you found this nugget, while you're in school. Obviously, I think I'm just not the only one, but we want you to write another one. So how do you go about finding that next idea, finding that next big thing that you want to center the next several years on? Because, let's face it, books, there are authors in this world who churn out a book every year. Power to them, right?
Love them. So jealous.
Like, I wish I could be you, but I'm not. So we're moving on. But it can take years. I mean, and in your case, again, it can take more than several years to go from point A to point B. So how do you build that idea, find that idea, build it, massage it?
Yeah. So I think the reason that it takes kind of a long time for me is that, how I described the Book of M has got the catalyst to shadows, and the story is about love. And then with the Cartographers, the catalyst is maps, but the story is about obsession. And so I think a lot of times what happens is I get the catalyst really early. Like I'll read something cool in the newspaper, or I'll travel some and I'll see something, or, it's like something will spark, and I'll have the catalyst for a really long time. And a lot of times I'll start writing at that point, and I, get 20, 50 pages in, and it just kind of fizzles out, because you can't, if you have a catalyst, but no fuel under that, then the fire just burns out. And so for me, I have to wait until I get what the story is about, So like I had maps, but I had to wait until I realized it was a story about like family and obsession. And then with the Book of M, it took me a long time to realize it's not about the shadows. Like, it's not about the plague. It's about love, and like what happens to people that love each other in a world where you are forgetting each other. Like, how do you save that if you are forgetting the very person that you're trying to, And so, I don't know, it's just kind of an alchemy. Like I take my catalyst and I put stuff next to it and like see what sticks, you know?
It's like, is it a magnet or what?
Really? Yeah. And I think, you know, even though I say I'm a pantser, and I definitely am, I can't outline, I can't plan or plot or any of that. But I think that probably in the end, I'm doing the same thing as an outliner. It's just they do it as an outline, and my outline is my first draft. So I just write, you know, like the only way that I can find the story is by writing it. And so I usually write a very bad, very messy first draft, and that most of it gets cut. But like that is my outline. It's me figuring out, what is this story about? Like, what does this catalyst cause? What's the question it's asking? And so, you know, eventually
it gets there.
Yeah. And so for my third book is, the first draft is due to my editor in 1 week from the date of this podcast. But I had the catalyst for a really long time, which I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say what it is yet, but
go ahead. You can say, what are they going to do? What are they going to do?
I know at this point. Yeah. But it took me, so I had this catalyst and I was like, what am I going to put with it? And, you know, it took forever. And it wasn't until I realized the story is about choice.
Okay.
It's about, you know, choice and the allure of choice. And is it better to have something that's real or something that's perfect, even if it's not as true, you know? And so, yeah, it's just this, I think it's a, you know,
look at how reflective you are now.
Yeah. I think because we don't really think about our process that much. We just kind of, you know, we're so down in the weeds doing it that, when somebody asks about it, I have to really think, how do I go about this?
Now, do you know, I don't know if authors have the brain power to know what type of book they want to write. Like, I guess if you're writing historical fiction, like you have that in your brain, you know, your event, you know, you've stumbled upon that.
Yeah.
Did you know the genre that you wanted the book to be in? Because it like many books, and let's face it, and librarians kind of hate authors for this, because, you know, we can't just put it in one pretty box and say, oh, this is this and this is the other thing. You know, it's suspense, it's mystery, it's got a little of dark academia in it, which, by the way, is slowly becoming one of my favorite genres.
Oh, I love it.
Because it's like, oh my gosh. But anyway, that's another show. So, and this next one you said was more of like a sci-fi.
Yes.
So is it just you trying to like expand your boundaries, test your limits? Or is it your just creative brain saying, we're doing this? So what actually is it?
It feels even less purposeful than that, because I think it would probably be a safer bet if I wrote more similar things. But what it really feels like is the story is telling me what kind of thing it is. And then I just gotta go with it. You know, like I it's not like I intentionally set out to write a mystery with the Cartographers, but it just so obviously the book felt like it wanted to be a mystery, and it had nothing to do with my intentions for it. But it was just so clearly like, you know, you've got a map with a secret on it, and you've got a family that's been torn apart, and this group of friends that something happened to them, you know, 30 years ago. And it was just, it was just like, oh, well, I can't deny this book that format. It just really wants to be mystery. And so I think this next one I started writing, and I didn't really know the tone of it until a couple chapters in. And then I realized, oh, it's the way that this is working, because it's about choice and about, you know, like what would you give up? What would you keep? And so it's definitely, it has told me that it's kind of a sci-fi thriller. It wasn't something that I chose for it. It's just kind of told me that that's what it is.
And I've heard that authors tell me all the time that characters do that too. Characters will tell you if they like the person you're pairing them with or not. They'll tell you whether or not they agree with what you're trying to get them to do or not. And I find that very interesting, because of course you in your head feel like the character needs to do one thing in order to get from point A to point B. How many of your 8, 9, 10 characters do we even count? How many of them didn't behave themselves?
Well, so really only 1 or 2 major ones, but it determined the rest of everything, because I started with Nell and her father. And in my first draft, I thought that they were friends. I thought that it was the 2 of them figuring out this mystery together, like as allies. And so I I just kept trying to write the draft that way. Like, it's Nell and her father, and they both work for the library, and they found this map together, and they're trying to discover what's on it. And I was getting nowhere, and they were fighting me every step of the way, and they kept getting in arguments and like leaving it. And I couldn't figure out why. I was like, why do you both hate each other so much? And then I realized that it's because they do kind of hate each other, because something really terrible happened to them 7 years ago. And he ends up firing her over an argument over this map that she finds and thinks might be worth something. And he says, this is it's worthless. You can't pursue this. And he gets so angry at her for arguing that he ends up firing her, and he ruins her career. And so when the book starts, they are definitely not friends. They're very estranged. They haven't talked for 7 years. And this map that they found together isn't the thing that brings them together. It's the thing that has pushed them apart. And so it wasn't until I realized that it's like Nell and her father are not friends that the whole story fell into place, because then it gave her a reason to want to figure out, like, why did he do such terrible things to me about this map that he said was worthless? But then 7 years later, when he dies, he still has the copy. Like, what, you know what I mean?
You punished him pretty drastically for not behaving too. You killed him.
I did.
Like, it's like, you didn't behave yourself, you must die. So done.
Yeah, I mean, power of the author. What can I say?
So it's like, it's really funny hearing, how it was those two characters, and then he's the one who's like, and this is not a spoiler alert.
I was so mad at him.
It's like, on this jacket, it's fine.
It is fine. Yeah,
it's totally fine. You're not losing.
He dies on the first page. He really does.
It's like, he's dead, and it's like, oh, well, don't piss her off. She'll kill you in your next book.
I mean, he was just so uncooperative, though. Like, he made so much trouble for me. He really did. I mean, I could not stand him in all my drafts because he just would not do what I said. So now you're dead.
Gotta go. Yeah. It's hilarious. So you recently went on a trip.
I did. Yeah.
Tell us all about it. Now, I've seen some of the pictures because, I stalk my author friends
on Instagram.
So you recently went to Iceland.
I did. It was amazing. And it was one of those trips that was kind of a long time coming, because my two really close friends, we were supposed to go together before COVID, and then COVID. And then, we were just waiting. So it was a trip that we'd been looking forward to for years. And we finally got to go in, I think it was June, or maybe it was July. But just the absolute, like, strangest and most beautiful place I've ever seen. Like, it does not look like you're on Earth. Every time we arrived at like some cliff, and then there's this volcanic beach where everything is black. Like, the sand is black, the cliffs are black. Like, it's just pitch black, and it's windy, and the water is really warm, which is really strange, because you touch it and you're expecting icy water, and it's like very warm. And I just thought, like, I'm on an alien planet, or I'm at the end of the world. I mean, it was just so, it seems like I know that death is called the dry place in Earthsea, in Ursula K. Le Guin's novels. So there's no water there, but it just felt like something like that. Like, this is what death looks like in an Ursula K. Le Guin novel or something. It's just, it was so beautiful and so weird. And I would go back tomorrow. If anyone wants to go, let's just go back.
The bank account might not appreciate that.
No, no, definitely not. But I would go anyway. It's so beautiful.
Did you encounter any yaks while you were there?
I didn't. There were a lot of sheep, though. And they
what's the deal with you and yaks?
Okay, so I have this theory that...
See, I told you, I do my research. I find things.
No, but I do have a theory about this. So my theory is, if you take any animal, the bigger its nose, the cuter it is. So if you take like a hamster and a guinea pig, which is cuter, the guinea pig, it's because its nose is bigger. Or if you take like a moose and a deer, the moose is cuter, it's because its nose is bigger. Or like a rhino and a hippo, the hippo's cuter because its nose is bigger. And so I just think yaks have gigantic noses. They're also just really odd. They're like goofy and strange. Yeah. And they're also like, they should be extinct kind of, but like musk oxen and yaks are they're like practically prehistoric, and they're so, they're just such ancient things that it kind of doesn't make any sense that they're still living in our present era. Yeah. And so I don't know, I just find them hilarious and adorable.
I was like, I'm finding a way to bring this into the conversation.
Oh, I'll talk about yaks anytime. You could have just, first question I've been like, yep, let's go. Let's roll.
Oh my gosh. Is there anything that you want to share with us that we maybe didn't talk about, whether it's Book of M? Oh, wait, I know. Book of M. Yeah. TV rights were sold.
Yes, they were. Yeah.
Where are we in that process?
So as you probably know, it's such a long process, and at any point you could, get turned down, because there's so many steps in a process to having a TV show made that, at any point you could just kind of fall through the cracks, or the studio doesn't like it, or whatever. And then on top of that, everything got slowed down because of the pandemic, and Hollywood essentially shut down for about a year.
Yes.
But we are, there's so much I'm not allowed to say about it. They were like, you can't.
Oh, that's good though.
I know.
That's really good. That's good news.
Yes, we are. Things are happening. We're still at a stage where it could, get canceled at any moment. But yes, good things are happening.
And what about the Cartographers? Did you sell film and TV rights for that yet?
So we're working on it. I've had a bunch of calls and meetings and stuff, but my film agent, he's amazing. He's best, but he's very picky. And so he wants to be, he's having me take a lot of meetings, but he doesn't want to make a move yet, I guess.
I don't think the Cartographers would necessarily be good for like a long-term thing.
Mm-hmm. It's like a limited,
It's either going to be limited, like TV special series, or like movie. It's going to be one of those two, because I don't think it could be either the other one.
Yeah, you're right. And that's a lot of what I think is holding this up. Is I've had calls where the angle is a film, and then calls where the angle is a limited series, and we just kind of can't figure out what would be the best fit. So now, you're spot on with that.
See, once you sell the rights, do you still have any type of literary or artistic participation in the process then?
Yes. So it can go all the way up to even script writing, but I, in my case, because I've never written a script before, I wanted to leave that to the experts.
You're like, no, I ain't doing that.
No. I want somebody who does a good job. So I'm not the script writer for the Book of M, for example. But I have, I guess it's like creative consultation rights or something. And I've been on calls with the writer and the director where we talk about, is this scene consistent with the way that you saw the magic working, or like what do you think about, could we do this instead, or like we'll emphasize this over that. And it's been so interesting because the way that you make a TV show is so different than the way that you structure a book. And in the scriptwriter, he's brilliant, and so I just love talking to him and hearing about just writing in a different medium.
I mean, the process sounds exciting, but is it enticing enough for you to like go and like start doing that? Or are you like, no, I'm good with books, thanks?
I think it would be fun. So I'm really interested in just being like a learner for the Book of M. So I want to watch him write. I want to read the script, and I just want to learn how you do it. And then I could see a version of the future where like the second or the third book or whatever, if something is getting made into a film or TV series in the future, that I could be like a writer on the script, but not the lead writer, because I would still want somebody who's like really experienced in that format. But I would love to contribute a little more as I learn more.
And I think too, I know that a lot of people get, and I'll use the most recent book adaptation, Where the Crawdads Sing, right?
Yes,
so there was this book, people loved it, and then there was the movie.
Yes.
You either love the adaptation or you don't, right? But I think, like, I look at everything. Harry Potter is a great example too. Harry Potter, the books stand on their own, right? The movies stand on their own. They take inspiration from the books, right? But it's you have a totally different person's artistic vision. Yes. When you're going into TV or a movie. And I think people forget that, like, when you sell the rights, you're selling the creative license for them to take your idea and reformat it in a way that is going to mirror your thought process, but not replicate it.
And I think that's what you want too, because why would you want to watch like a page by page replay of the thing that you've already read? You know, you want something that takes it and kind of, you know, looks at it from a really different angle or just goes beyond the source material. So I totally agree with that.
And that's why the different mediums are so wonderful. And, you know, some people love books. I'm one of those people who loves books. Right? Other people can't stand books, but they love TV and movies, right? So it's all about the way that artists find to connect with their audience, you know, and I think that it's brilliant that, you know, some of these great stories are making their way to the small screen, to the big screen, because let's face it, sometimes Hollywood doesn't get it. And, you know, you need to take inspiration from the good books. So I'm ecstatic to start seeing, I mean, there's so many in production right now that I'm kind of hyped about. You know, again, it's like, we can't really talk about a lot of these things because, you know, we're not allowed, but just knowing, you know, what's been announced in Publishers Weekly and like those types of things, like it's really fascinating. So I'm so glad we were able to talk. I've been looking forward to this. Like I said,
oh, me too. We've had it for like months and months, right? On the books.
It's been months. And like I said at the beginning, when I stumbled upon this book and when I read it, I was like, oh, everybody needs to know about this book. And I think because again, who writes about map people? Like, come on, nobody writes about map people. And dark academia, you know, it's, you know, Dan Brown, and this book has been compared to Dan Brown. You know, and his writing style. So that whole like dark academia type scavenger hunt for adults, I think has also been, you know, utilized. I think it's great. You know, I would have loved the 800-page one, but you know, the edits made it work, and you know, you got a great mystery out of it. Thank you so much. Look, we're gonna have to have a party when everything starts coming to screen. So
obviously,
we'll definitely be doing a screen party. I don't see any questions right now, folks. If you want, certainly go ahead and make any Facebook comments in the chat, and then, you know, I can go ahead and email them to her, and we can see about, you know, answering some questions offline if you want. That's not a problem at all. Go get the books. We have both of them available at the Pamunkey Regional Library. Good luck, because you will be placed on hold. It will be a wait because they are not available right now. Thank you. I'm losing my voice, so it's time to go. Thank you so much. Good night, everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much.